evolutionary process, which can be seen to increase the information in the genome.
And that actually went on for another 30 seconds, and he got mad, and he said, cut. So, again, if evolution is true, it should be real easy to come up with some examples of beneficial mutations, and he couldn't come up with one. Here's one of my favorite topics. It's kind of related to the work I do, is, let's talk about this. So evolutionists, secular scientists would like to tell you that there's two major entities in the world. There's matter and there's energy. Everything is made up of matter and energy, but they're leaving out one important thing. Can this robot work on sheer matter and energy? Matter being all the material, energy being the power. What's missing from this picture here? Information. So when we discovered DNA, one of the co-discoverers, Francis Crick, was so overwhelmed with it, he realized that you can't have information without a sender. You can't. It's not like it's highly unlikely. It's impossible. So he scrapped evolution, but because he was committed to not wanting any part of God, he said that aliens seeded life down here. That was his excuse. All he's doing is pushing the problem up in space and back in time. So here's another guest book entry. This is a guy named Dr. Scott Page, and I'm not one of his favorite people. He dedicated a couple pages on his website to me. But Jesus says, if they hate me, they'll hate you. So I figured I was doing something right. After he was challenged to produce a single example where a code or language arose by purely naturalistic processes, he replied with this in the guest book: who sent the code in tree rings? So isn't that like just one symbol? Is that a language? Is there a language in a tree? So I think that's kind of silly, but okay, the golden plover, this is pretty cool. This bird migrates from Alaska to Hawaii, and it's a long ways, it's 2,500 miles, and there's no islands in between, so it has nowhere to land. It has to go fly the whole distance. And they put on about 50% of additional weight before they take off, and interestingly, they'll convert 0.6% of this per flight hour into motion and heat. Our Huey helicopters run at about 10%. So here's the problem. When scientists do their measurements, well, I hope that guy's not ready to explode. When scientists do their measurements, they realize that at that rate they would fall about 500 miles short of Hawaii. So how are the birds getting there? How are they making it to Hawaii? All measurements show that they should not make it. They don't have enough fuel to get there, so to speak. Maybe it's Francis Crick's alien aircraft got them there or trained them how to get there. Anybody know how they get there? Werner Gitt was here about, 5 years ago? Bill, it's not fair. He was here about 5 years ago, maybe longer, and this is one of the examples he gave. They fly in a V formation. So where did they get the information to know to do that? The adult birds take off before they, and leave the young ones there, so it's not like they educate them on how this works. Birds take turns flying in the front, and the birds that tend to be the weakest get to fly in the back where there's the least resistance. With this V formation that you notice in the sky when you see birds flying, they could fly 500 miles past Hawaii. Where did they get the information to do that? Okay, let's talk about the age of the earth. God's going to ask a lot of people, where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? And if I would have died before the age of 30, he would have been asking me that. And again, I did not see the gorilla in the room. I was only shown the white shirts. 30 years. I'm not kidding. I was shocked because I had never even heard an argument for a young earth. It was amazing to me. So in public schools, they claim the earth is about 4.6 billion years. In the Bible, if you look at the genealogies, it comes up to around roughly 6,000 years. Let's take a look at this. Here's what one evolutionist wrote. Time is, in fact, the hero of the plot. One only has to wait. Time itself performs miracles. Okay, now this next slide, there's a scientific phrase for this, but I have difficulty pronouncing it, so I'm going to ask Lou DeGrave to help me pronounce it. The reason I asked Lou is because I got, yeah. So that's a bunch of baloney. So we're going to get out our baloney detector for a lot of the rest of this presentation. And I encourage kids when I give these presentations to have your baloney detector out on me too. Be like the Bereans. Paul called the Bereans the most noble in the Bible because they searched the scriptures to prove they were so. Don't just take my word for it. Don't take word for someone who comes to your door who may be preaching Mormonism, or your public school teachers that are real confident in the way they preach evolution. Prove these things are so yourself and get out your baloney detector. So here's a book of fairy tales. You have a frog and you use magic and you get a prince. You get a high school biology book, you take a frog and you add time and you get a prince. It's ready to get out the baloney detector and realize this is also a fairy tale for grown-ups. Here's from a high school textbook. The first self-replicating systems must have emerged in this organic soup. One page earlier said